I know there's some delegates outside, if we can, I was asked to please give them a couple of minutes before they step back in. While they'll do that, I'd like to just speak a little bit about the session this afternoon. And as we had this morning a general introduction to the issue of safety and safety culture and so forth, we are now going to begin to get a little more specific on that. Whereas our last speaker, Robert Ford, talked about accidents and lessons learned, Todd Ripley, acting director of the Office of Safety of MARAD, will talk to us about specific safety initiatives. And on that note, I'd like to introduce Todd, if I could find his, here we go. Here we go. Todd Ripley is acting director of the Office of Safety at MARAD, and he has over 24 years of experience in the federal service, where he currently serves as the acting director for the Office of Safety under the Associate Administrator for the Environment and Compliance at the Maritime Administration. In this position, he fosters and encourages development, application, and acceleration of best management practices, procedures, technological advancements, and implementation strategies with programmatic support for and improvements in safety and compliance rules, regulations, national and international standards, research and development, and maritime operations. He is MARAD's technical representative to the Department of Transportation's Safety Council, the Research, Development, and Technology Planning Team, and the Human Factors Coordinating Committee. Mr. Ripley serves as the agency sponsor for the Ship Operation Comparative Program, like the Transportation Research Board and the Marine Board. He is the current chairman for ASTM International's Committee on Ships and Marine Technology. Prior to the service at the Maritime Administration, Mr. Ripley was with the Naval Sea Systems Command Engineering Directorate, worked with Advanced Marine Enterprises, an engineering design firm, and 2 shipyards, which included commercial and naval ship construction. So as you can see, Mr. Ripley's curriculum and professional life more than makes him an apt speaker for this session. So Todd, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jorge. Thank you to the Inter-American Committee on Ports for the invitation to speak, and good afternoon. The Office of Safety. No problem.
I'm so sorry to interrupt I'll say this in Spanish and English, but for the interpretation to begin, actually, because of the time, they will begin at 1. So let me say this in Spanish. Para los que hablamos español, me han comentado que la señora intérprete traductora regresa a la 1 por la hora de comer que hay que dar. Entonces, si no les importa, podemos comenzar estos 10 minutos en inglés y cuando la intérprete regrese, seguramente de inmediato se incorporará. Gracias. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. The Office of Safety is under the Associate Administrator for Environment and Compliance at the Maritime Administration. The U.S. Coast Guard shoulders the majority of the burden and load for maritime safety in the United States, but with a small office, the Maritime Administration addresses safety issues in targeted areas. What I'm going to cover for you today is an overview of the Office of Environment and Compliance, a list of a few activities that our Office of Environment is working, and next slide. Thank you very much. A list of a few items that the Office of Environment is working with safety implications, then list a few items that the Office of Security is working, again with safety implications, then cover activities being worked by the Office of Safety that include the Department of Transportation activities, International Maritime Organization activities and safety standards development, the Ship Operations Cooperative Program, and a few research-related activities. The Office of Security, Safety, and Environment are under the Associate Administrator for Environment and Compliance. Next slide, please. The office is committed to assisting industry in areas of safety, security, and environmental protection that include support for development of best management practices and compliance issues. The office is supported by mariners, marine engineers, naval architects, environmental specialists, security professionals, and data analysts. Next slide. The office balances safety, security, and environmental concerns with that of commercial mobility and a robust U.S. transportation system. Thank you. Staff works closely with industry, labor, researchers, federal government agencies such as the U.S. Coast Guard and environmental protection agencies on issues that are important to the maritime industry. Next slide, please. This is an organization chart for the Associate Administrator for Environment and Compliance. John Quinn serves as our Associate Administrator and has the Office of Safety, the Office of Security, and the Office of Environment under him. As you can see, the offices are relatively small, with the largest being the Office of Environment. Next slide. Under the Office of Environment, a few of the activities that staff is working that might be of interest to you include ballast water treatment technology evaluation for their effectiveness. They're also contributing to development of ballast water testing standards for the International Organization of Standardization. Under alternative energies, this staff is actively working on liquefied natural gas projects that include a total fuel cycle project looking at extraction out of the ground through emissions out of the stack. They're working on an LNG study looking at bunkering, infrastructure, and training issues. Merit is supporting an LNG repowering demonstration that will collect emissions data before and after repowering. As staff is also working on a fuel cell prototype project for power generation that has a broad consortium of partners. In addition, they're studying properties of different biofuels for their performance and impact on marine equipment. Next slide. These are a few of the ballast water testing performance platforms that Merit is associated with. The one in the left upper right corner is the California Maritime Academy training vessel that is testing ballast water technologies. The Marine Environmental Resource Center under the University of Maryland is working to test ballast water technologies on a barge, and that's in the Baltimore area. And there's a land-based facility called the Great Ships Initiative in the Great Lakes region in the upper right-hand corner that is testing technology as well. Do we have the Latin piece, the Spanish piece yet?
In about 5 more minutes, but I can.
Do you want to announce it, or?
About five minutes. Yes.
Okay.
Todd, could I ask a quick question on the
Yes.
technology testing that you're doing? Is this
Sure.
in conjunction with the Coast Guard? And is this part, I know that they've got their AIMS program, that they've accepted technologies that are IMO approved, but have yet to issue approvals on, giving Coast Guard approval on technologies. So which is this?
I know they're coordinating with the Coast Guard, but I don't know if, if these are IMO approved or just domestically. So I will have to get back to you on that.
Okay,
But
thank you.
Michael Carter in our Office of Environment can answer that for you.
Thank you,
I
Todd.
know they're coordinating the activities, but I'm not sure if these are IMO approved yet or not. Next slide, please. Under the Office of Security, covered by Bob Ford and Kimberly Brown, who you heard from Bob earlier today, they're covering a lot of the maritime security activities. They issue maritime advisories, anti-piracy activities, maritime domain awareness activities, and participate in port security grant reviews. Next slide, please. Thanks. MARAD's Office of Security disseminates maritime advisories to U.S. flag vessel masters, ship operators, and other U.S. maritime interests with information on maritime safety, dangers, and governmental policy. The maritime advisories are issued via telex and other text messaging format and published on the MARAD website and the National Imagery and Mapping Agency Weekly Notice to Mariners. The Office of Security Anti-Piracy activities include collaboration with international maritime communities in development of security best practices, partnering on anti-piracy and security training programs, assisting with anti-piracy assessment teams, activities, developing and support for U.S. delegations in the United Nations International Group on piracy off the coast of Somalia, and development of training for use of force against piracy attack.
Thank you. A brief announcement. Our interpreters are back on the saddle. So, para aquellos que hablan español, ya las señoras intérpretes están nuevamente traduciendo, así es que pueden usar sus auriculares. Gracias.
Thank you. The U.S. Maritime Administration, is, with assistance from the Military Sealift Command, developed an anti-piracy assessment team, or APATS, as a volunteer program to harden ships against piracy attack. The teams visit U.S. flag merchant vessels in port to assess their physical security vulnerabilities to piracy and provide ships with the best practices against piracy. The Office of Security represents MARAD on marine domain awareness activities and provides leadership to the U.S. DOT on matters related to maritime security for the marine transportation system. These activities include the Maritime Security Interagency Policy Committee, the National Maritime Interagency Integration Office, and the National Security Staff. Next slide. And Bob and Kim both are here, so if there's any security questions, they can definitely help us out with them. So, next slide, please. Under the Office of Safety, we represent the Maritime Administration and Department of Transportation Safety Council. This is a multimodal group designed to promote cross-modal collaboration on issues related to transportation safety. The Safety Council is led by an executive team that consists of the modal administrators at the Department of Transportation. The technical team is made up of DOT modal safety officer and provides leadership and support for technical activities and initiatives. And the action teams provide support for focus areas and initiatives that are identified as critical issues by the executive and technical teams. A few of the areas being worked include safety culture within transportation, cybersecurity within the transportation network, and safety data.gov initiative that was developed and added a site under the data.gov website with safety data for use of development of applications and safety analysis. And then an operator distraction action team that is looking at distractions in the various modes, and that was recently established. Next slide, please. Also, under DOT, we are a member of the Human Factors Coordinating Committee, designed to promote cross-modal collaboration and human factors issues in transportation. A few items developed include an operation fatigue management program that includes a work schedule analysis software, a business case tool, a fatigue modeling validation procedure, and a fatigue management reference guide. In addition, the Human Factors Coordinating Committee supports human factors events such as the International Conference on Fatigue Management, plus many others. And the HFCC has worked to establish an intern program designed to develop human factors professionals in transportation. Next slide, please. Staff participates on the U.S. delegation to the International Maritime Organization as resources allow. We participate on the IMO instruments and implementation code activities, providing review and comment on accident investigation and analysis. And Bob Ford's our representative there, and I think he briefly mentioned it in his remarks. We participate in the ship design and equipment subcommittee, and facilitated a workshop that contributed to the U.S. position regarding standards for training and watchkeeping. Staff participates in the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA's Federal Advisory Committee, MACOSH, that focuses on safety-related subjects for marine terminals and shipbuilding in the shipbuilding industry. Next slide, please. We participate in the International Organization for Standardization, activities for standards development. These are activities for standard development to support IMO requirements. We are instrumental in development of ballast water standards and review draft ballots and also balloted standards contributing to the U.S. position. Here are a few lists of the ISO Technical Committee 8 subcommittees where we contribute in the areas of life-saving, fire protection, navigation, ship operations, ship design, and environmental protection. Next slide, please. Merit currently chairs ASTM's International Committee on Ships and Marine Technology. This is another standards development organization for the maritime industry. The committee develops standards, test methods, terminology, best practices, and guides for design, construction, operation, and repair of marine vessels, structures, marine equipment, and materials. The committee meets twice a year, usually May and December, and periodically conducts seminars on relevant maritime topics. The next seminar we're having is at DOT headquarters on May 7th, and that is to look at standards development opportunities in the maritime industry. ASTM F25 has 8 technical subcommittees listed here that maintain these standards, and they include structures, insulation, outfitting and deck machinery, computer applications, marine environmental protection, general requirements, electrical, and marine and piping safety. Next slide. The Ship Operations Cooperative Program that was mentioned in Chip's remarks, and we had a question regarding it, is a nonprofit organization of maritime industry professionals that promote beneficial innovations in ships and other maritime operations. The members partner to identify, develop, and apply new methods, tools, and technologies to improve safety, productivity, efficiency, and security and environmental performance in the maritime industry. SOCP's members work to solve common problems, to develop products, and develop products that satisfy common needs. Next slide. SOCP has a diverse membership. Members include operators such as Crowley Maritime and Maersk Lines, union training schools such as MyTags under the Masters, Mates, and Pilots Union, the Star Center under the American Maritime Officers Union, classification societies, ABS and DNV. Also, government agencies are members, U.S. Coast Guard, NOAA, Maritime Administration, and the Military Sealift Command are members. All the state training academies are members, as well as the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. We have research institutes like the Great Lakes Maritime Research Institute is a member. SOCP has a special category For high schools, that is discounted specifically for them, and other organizations or members as well, such as the Sea Scouts. To provide a brief history of SOCP, a workshop was formed. A workshop was held in 1992 to explore the formation of a program to support ship operations. As a result of the workshop, the Ship Operations Cooperative Program, or SOCP, was formed in 1993 with the core group of members contributing funding and support for the program. In 1997, the membership fee for core members was reduced to $5,000 per year per organization. And as a result of that, the membership grew to over 40 members. In 2008, SOCP registered as a nonprofit organization, and in 2013, SOCP expanded its scope to cover a broader maritime focus. Next slide, please. The governing documents for SOCP include a cooperative agreement that is managed by the Maritime Administration. A set of bylaws was developed by the SOCP members, providing governing structure for the organization and its operations. SOCP has developed a code of conduct for its members to follow at meetings and dealing with other members to ensure in a constructive environment. SOCP has several categories of membership. The core membership fee is $5,000. The Maritime Academies is $1,000, and the high schools are $500. All of the projects and initiatives are member-led and member-driven. A few of the completed next slide, please. A few of the completed projects include initiatives like development of a list of strategies to combat distracted operations in the maritime industry, a mariner preparedness checklist to ensure personnel have their personal documents and paperwork in order prior to sailing. A SOCP sponsored a workshop that contributed to the U.S. position for the standards for training and watchkeeping being required by IMO. SOCP has developed 2 exhaust gas scrubber technology reports to assess the state of the technology in the industry. Members provided input to the U.S. Coast Guard re-engineering of the Regional Exam Center and the Mariner licensing and documentation process, as well as their security plan review process. SOCP has also submitted comments to the docket for notice of proposed rulemakings on right whale strike and transportation worker identification credential, plus others. SOCP developed an IMO course for U.S. Maritime Academies with a ship safety manual template for them to use. Next slide, please. Completed projects, SOCP members get products at cost, and they're sold to non-members for profit to generate revenue for additional product development activities and other projects. Some of the recent computer-based training products developed include the Deck and Line Handling Safety DVD, the Anti-Piracy DVD, Safety Culture DVD, and the Electrical Safety DVD. These products, many of these products were developed in response to accidents and incidents on member organization vessels. In addition, SOCP has an entire portfolio of computer-based training and other products that are available to members and are sold to non-members that have been developed over the years. Next slide, please. This is just a picture of the couple of the products that have been recently developed. The product to the upper left is, I chose not to look the other way. That's the Safety Culture video that was developed. The line handling and the electrical, the 2 on the bottom, were ones developed as a result of incidents on member vessels. And then the exhaust gas scrubber assessment is in the middle. Next slide, please. SOCP and its SOCP projects and initiatives currently being worked include a cybersecurity computer-based training product geared towards mariners, a maritime leadership training product to support STCW requirements, a K through 12 maritime curriculum for use by teachers in preparing lessons plans, and development of 2 ASTM standards, one for incident reporting and one for near-miss reporting. SOCP has also worked with the Port of Seattle to develop 3 video clips focusing on maritime awareness and career opportunities. This is another project that we're putting together now. Again, these projects were identified by needs as from members and are member-led and member-driven. The next SOCP meeting will be in Galveston, Texas at Texas Maritime Academy on May 13th and 14th and focus on offshore oil and gas industry, safety, and other safety issues. One panel that was mentioned earlier today, or the topic was mentioned earlier today, will focus on the workload on paperwork burdens on mariners and the impacts on safety and possible solutions. A few of the other areas where safety implications, where the Office of Safety staff participate include a ship structures committee that focuses on projects to promote structural safety for marine vessels. Members of the agency are also engaged in Society of Naval Architect and Marine Engineer activities that look at various aspects of vessel design and operation. And staff participates in the National Shipbuilding Research Program activities that promote safe and efficient ship production. Next slide, please. This is just a relatively quick overview of the Maritime Administration's Office of Environment and Compliance with activities with activities with a safety focus. Again, if you have any questions, I can get you more information or details on any of the information presented, and also we can take questions if we have time.
Can I? We do. Yes, Todd. I don't know if you're introduce myself.
Yes.
Sinoen Babwa from the Port of Port-au-Prince, Harbor Manager, that is in Trinidad and Tobago. You did not speak to the MLC 2006, advocate for that, and that is like it is fresh on the burner for safety. And if you have any programs similar like that in nature. Thank you.
Yeah, none that we're working at Marriott.
Thank you very much there, Todd. I have a couple of, well, or one question that perhaps you can have. Oh, thank you so much. Well, first of all, I think that the initiative and the office you direct is, as I looked at your presentation and I realized that you have many stakeholders because you address a varied and diverse number of subject areas, and that what you've done there perhaps can be a lesson learned is that you group this multiple stakeholders on committees or projects or initiatives to then address specific issues. And from that, you go ahead and you develop the standards and the guidelines and training courses and materials, so forth, which is all really worthy of admiration. My question is, your office, your outfit there, doesn't have anything to do with the enforcement of these, right?
Correct.
Could you speak a little bit about the enforcement? Who's responsible for what in that sense?
Yes, yeah, all the enforcement really is Coast Guard enforcement, or there's environmental, EPA has some enforcement. So Maritime Administration is majority, for the most part, a advocacy agency and a promotional agency for the maritime industry. We have programs such as Title 11, and we manage a ready reserve fleet, but most of the regulatory responsibility and leading the delegation to IMO activities and international activities comes from the Coast Guard, which is well-staffed to handle that and do a lot of activities in that area.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, please, Professor. Or that we're just waiting for the microphone to get to him. Thank you.
Sí, buenos días. Hugo Sergio Gómez de la Universidad del Oeste en México. La mayor parte de la flota mercante de Estados Unidos está con bandera de conveniencia. ¿Hay alguna relación del Departamento de Administración con ese tipo de embarcaciones? Si su departamento tiene alguna relación, alguna supervisión o alguna relación con este tipo de empresas marítimas que tienen buques de bandera de conveniencia, que son empresas navieras de los Estados Unidos, ya sea las petroleras que están en Liberia o las que están abanderadas en Panamá.
Yeah, most of the international fleet is foreign flagged vessels that are operating here. I think we have a small fleet traveling and working internationally. The ones going from U.S. port to U.S. port are Jones Act trade. I think that's what you're talking about, and I think for the most part that is monitored by our agency, and we keep an eye on that.
I think further to the question also is for ships traveling on flags of convenience to the United States, they're monitored by the Coast Guard, who also monitors U.S. flag in terms of enforcement. So the responsibility for enforcing international regulations are the U.S. Coast Guard enforces them, as well as the flag state administrations. So
David,
you need a microphone right there.
Yes, this is David Condino, and I am from the Coast Guard. I don't think anybody else is here from the Coast Guard at the moment, but you're absolutely right. And of course, Carlene, it's under the port state control provisions in under MARPOL and other IMO treaty obligations that we have. So anybody that is a member of IMO, 170 now plus countries, and of course many or all, perhaps all of you, in this room representing countries in the Americas, we all conform to that, and you all have the same rights. So U.S. ships going to a foreign port, clearly they may be subject to they are subject to all international regulations, but also subject to port state control within those countries under those countries' legislation, obligated under IMO to implement the provisions for the international regulations under MARPOL, whatever safety regulations. That's the way it works. And of course, the Maritime Administration, the Coast Guard, and other agencies participate in the process to maintain the regulations and also at the international regulations, which get translated into our national legislation. So,
thank you, David.
thank you.
Over there in the corner. Would you please turn your mic off so that? Thank you. Thank you very much. Another question, and while you think it up, I wanted to just reflect upon the perhaps the lesson that we can learn from from the presentation that Don has given, and that is that there is a common interest amongst multiple stakeholders in cross-cutting sectors and industries to address the issue of maritime safety, whether it's cruise lines, whether it's shipping, whether it's recreational, whether it's just short-term distance like the ferries. These are all parts of a sector, of an industry that, as we can see, Marit has tried to tackle in a comprehensive way by trying to get those stakeholders involved in all of this, both public and private and academic, because I saw some universities involved in trying to determine what the best way to deal with a particular issue is. Then the enforcement of that comes under the responsibility of other agencies, other government agencies, and I presume that there is a very active and close communication between the Coast Guard's relevant dependencies and MARIT's relevant dependency for that. So, so I just wanted to reflect upon that and say, well, this is maybe something that we could learn from. Unless we have any other questions, I'd like to thank Todd very, very much for his presentation. Thank you, Todd.
No problem. I have SOCP brochures and product brochures if anybody wants them, so.
Yes, that we have a table out there. Todd, you can place them there, and here is your
Thank you very much.
participation. Thank you. Thank you. Again, thank you very much, Todd. Thank you. Well, this is great. I don't mind telling you that I have organized and been involved in countless seminars and workshops over the years. And the fact that we are not only not behind schedule, but about 5 minutes ahead of schedule is really commendable. And I'd like to thank the speakers for that, for keeping to their times and presentations. Congratulations to all of them. All right. Well, now we come to the first part in the program where we won't have a government representatives, but actually representatives from well, David Condino will be up here from the Coast Guard, but Carlene Linden-Klaus will be up here. And before I invite you both to come up here and I make space for you here, let me tell you who we're listening to. Carlene Linden-Klaus is the co-founder and executive director of NAMEPA, which you've heard multiple times today, the North American Marine Environment Protection Association. And leveraging off her experience as a marketing and communications professional in the commercial maritime industry with over 30 years of experience. She specializes in identifying, developing, and implementing strategic marketing and communication programs that increase the visibility and effectiveness of NAMEPA, as well as the development of educational resources promoting marine environment protection. She works to develop strategic alliances between industry, regulators, and environmental groups to get them involved in a campaign called Save the Seas, or Save Our Seas. In addition, Ms. Linden-Klaus is a member of WISTA, which is Women's International Shipping and Trading Association, where she serves as press officer for the U.S. chapter and International Connecticut Maritime Association, the Maritime Society of the City of New York, Intertanko, and the National Press Club, and is the immediate past president of the Propeller Club chapter of the Port of New York, New Jersey, as well as a trustee of Sea Research Foundation and the Maritime Industries Academy in Baltimore, Maryland, and it is a board member of the Working Harbor Committee of New York. She was elected to the Board of Trustees and the Coast Guard Foundation and the Coast Guard Auxiliary Foundation. She is, in addition, currently the president of Morgan Marketing and Communications, the executive director of NYMAR, which is New York Maritime Incorporated, and the co-founder and executive director of the Merchant Marine Policy Coalition. In 2010, she was awarded the Certificate of Merit by the United States Coast Guard, and she's graduated from Wesley College with a BA in Political Science and History, a minor in Economics, and studied accounting at Cornell School of Business Administration, and she's a trained facilitator and media trainer. She also holds a United States Coast Guard 100-ton captain's license. Please help me welcome Carly.
Mr. Moderator, you forgot one thing. You forgot one thing.
What did I forget?
And she's beautiful.
Well, indeed, but you know, with that, I would also like to invite David Condino. David, I don't have your bio notes here, ma'am, but I think you guys can take care of it. And no, I got it.
And also I've invited James Spear, and we need Matt and Thomas up as well.
Right. Nice to meet you. Please, I'll move over. I'll leave you those seats, and I'll just move over here. Yeah, it's fine. You guys.
We'll enrobe you.
Right. No, I'm all right.
What I do want is the microphone.
The microphone. Oh, you're gonna walk around. ¿Me presta el micrófono?
Well, thank you all. Those of you who are going to get to know me a little bit better after the next hour and a half, and those of you who do know me, know that I'm not comfortable just sitting there. So I'm going to be wandering around during my presentation, and it's going to make the cameraman crazy. So for the rest of you, I hope it provides a little bit of a variety from having, talking heads up at the front. But I just like to engage with audiences, and I like to be part of you. I am indeed Carleen Leidenklosse, and Jorge, I'm terribly embarrassed by the length of that introduction. I'll have to edit it next time. What is more important than my introduction are the people that are sitting up in front of you. But I want to tell you a little story of how this all came about. Last July, the gentleman on our left over here, Captain David Condino, organized along with the IMO and UNEP, and he's the Coast Guard, a port waste reception facility conference down in Fort Lauderdale. And it was extremely well attended and extremely informative. But in addition to all of that, the highlight for me was meeting Jorge Duran. And that was my first time meeting Jorge. He'd been in the job for 2 weeks, I think. And he was already presenting at this conference and did a masterful job. And as you all know, Jorge has energy that even surpasses mine. And I'm called the Energizer Bunny. I don't know what they call you, Jorge, and I certainly don't know the Spanish translation for it. But it really began a partnership with SIP that we very much value, and we have an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with SIP, and it is to promote marine environment education. And we were extremely delighted, not only with the partnership and being able to work with Jorge, but the fact that we were instantly able to translate the partnership into solid documents and solid work. And a lot of you know in your presentation materials that we have our marine debris poster. And SIP translated it into Spanish for us. And I think Jorge is going to make that available to the delegates who want it in Spanish.
Colleen, if I may interrupt you there, throughout the day of today, as Carleen's presentation takes place, we have prepared a small package of 200 of those brochures in English and Spanish, respectively, for you all to take with you to your countries. In addition to that, thanks to Carleen and the partners, we have been given the PDF or the digital rights for this in both English and Spanish, and both of these will put up you can find it on her website, and you will be able to find it on our website as well, so that you can download it or pass it along on Facebook and all the social media. The objective, of course, being to raise the awareness of the terrible consequences of not putting trash in its place. I'm sorry. So you'll get a little package throughout the day, and this is what it's going to be in it. Thank you.
Well, none of this work would be possible without our partners. And one of the first groups to join NAMEPA, in fact, they wrote our founding documents, was Blank Rome. On your right, you'll meet Matt Thomas, who's a partner at Blank Rome. Now, he's a relatively new entrant, but he just told me in the hallway, he said, with all the environmental work that Blank Rome does for ports and for ship owners, it was the natural place for him to come to. So we're delighted that Matt Thomas has joined Blank Rome. And as I said, they have been a part of NAMEPA since we were founded in 2007. One of our other partnerships is with the United States Coast Guard, and we have an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the United States Coast Guard. So we're delighted that David has been able to join us today and talk a little bit about about ship waste and their disposal. Now, in the middle is James Spear. Now, he's not on your agenda, so don't go looking for him. He is a surprise entrant and a guest today. James was a cadet at SUNY Maritime College, and while there, he came into New York for the 2009 World Maritime Day Parallel event, which I was helping the Coast Guard with. And we had the Secretary General of the IMO. We had a lot of international delegations. And at the end of the day, everybody went off to dinner, and I had to, finish a few things, and there was a cadet still with me, and that was James. And he not only was helpful on World Maritime Day, he went on to found the chapter of NAMEPA at SUNY Maritime College. And when he graduated, he sailed for Shell as a third mate on LNG ships, and is currently sailing for Sea River Maritime, which is, as you know, part of ExxonMobil. As a third mate right now, but I think it's going up to second mate pretty soon. So James, when he's not sailing on board ships, works with us at NMEPA. So he was able to, he's not sailing at the moment, so he was able to come to Washington because he wanted very much to be a part of this. Because the discussion we're going to have today has to do with the environmental piece. You all are part of your role is, your primary role is safety. But the marine environment safety is an incredibly important part of what all ports and countries are looking for in order to secure their populations and secure their commerce. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on NMEPA, and then we'll get to the interesting people. They may not have as, my legs, but they're much more interesting than I am. So what we're doing, I'm going to talk to you today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about initiatives that we have at NMEPA to save our seas. If you could change, please. What is our mission? Our mission is to preserve and protect the marine environment naturally. It's to also demonstrate Maritime's interest, commitment, and involvement in protecting the marine environment. Now, that's not what normally comes to mind. If people think about ships and ports, they're not thinking about protecting the marine environment. They think about oil in the water and dead birds. That is absolutely the opposite end of the spectrum from what's true. Maritime industry knows that their welfare, their well-being rests in protection of the marine environment, and NMEPA helps demonstrate that commitment to the marine environment. We support the marine industry. We work with ports, we work with classification societies, we work with ship owners, we work with harbor schools, we work with maritime universities. And we do a couple of things. We engage maritime businesses, regulators, and environmental groups to talk about marine environment protection. Prior to NMEPA, you would rarely, if ever, find environmental groups and the maritime industry in the same room. Partly because they weren't invited. Partly because the maritime industry didn't know how to talk to environmentalists, and environmental groups didn't know how to talk to maritime. They kept saying to me, we don't know how to talk to your industry. We don't know where to find them. So NMEPA does a great job pulling those groups together. 2 weeks ago, we had an event in San Francisco that was headed up by NOAA, and we sponsored it. It was on marine debris. NOAA was there. We had all the California conservation groups there, along with industry. And there wasn't any food fighting. No food fights whatsoever. And that's because by learning, by collaborating and getting to know each other, we gain respect for each other and knowledge about what each other's roles are. A lot of environmental groups will come to me now, and they'll say, we want to go after the shipping and the port industries. And I said, that's great. Let's sit down and talk about it. Okay, so I'll sit with these groups and I'll say, okay, where do you want to start? Well, first off, we want to start with the fact that your industry isn't regulated. I said, oh, well, have you ever heard of the International Maritime Organization? No. Well, have you ever heard of MARPOLs? No. By the time we end the meeting, they not only are educated to the fact that we operate under a very rigorous set of regulations, but that they are also enforced. That was information that the conservation groups didn't have prior to now, and we're delighted that they do. What is also useful is when our regulators come in and talk to us as an industry and as the environmental groups. The Coast Guard appears on every single one of our programs. And that is part of our valued partnership with the Coast Guard, is that we want them there at every event because we want them to hear what industry has to say, but industry needs to hear what they have to say. So it really works out well. And we also work to engage the public, to educate the public. We work with seafarers, we work with port communities, and we work with students. Change, please. Our members consist of corporate, academic, and individuals engaged in the maritime industry, and we're also that intersection between industry regulators and environmental groups. We have international members, we have domestic members, we have members in Canada, the United States, Mexico, and we're hoping, he just walked out of the room so I can talk behind his back, we're hoping that with Jorge's leadership we'll be able to develop a CARIB-MEPA, because we want to help expand the resources and the knowledge about marine environment protection. Next. We host and participate in industry events and conferences. As I mentioned, we did one 2 weeks ago in San Francisco. This year we've been in Houston. We go to Long Beach, we go to Anchorage, we go to New Orleans, Seattle. We do a World Maritime Day observance every year. This year it's going to be in Mexico. in Cozumel the week of October 20th. We rotate with Canada and the United States. We're doing a National Maritime Day seminar. We do that every year. This year it is going to be on National Maritime Day in the United States in Washington, D.C. on May 22nd. It's going to be a very busy day, MARAD. And we end that with the AMVER Awards. That was a program that wasn't mentioned earlier in terms of one of the outcomes of the Titanic sinking, is that the Coast Guard implemented a program, I think it was in 1956, called AMVER. And what it is it's a voluntary program where shipping companies promise to divert in the case of an SOS. So if an SOS comes into the Coast Guard alerts the closest ship to the incident where the SOS is, and those ships have agreed to divert and perform rescue operations. It's particularly helpful in the middle of the ocean. And so we have an AMVER dinner that night recognizing those shipping companies. We're also active in the Connecticut Maritime Association conference up in Stamford, and we work with shipping and offshore corporate social responsibility fora. Next. In terms of our initiatives, we have initiatives towards seafarers. We work with them to augment, not to supplement, not to replace, but to augment their existing knowledge about MARPOLs and marine environment protection. A year ago, we received money from the National Fish and Wildlife Federation to create this MARPOL handbook, and there are a bunch out on our table. This is the only document that exists where you put together the MARPOL regulations with the impact on the marine environment. So it's not just the what of the MARPOLs, it's the why. Why is it important to have MARPOL Annex 1 there? Well, this is what happens when oil's in the water. Why is it important to have MARPOL 5? Well, this is what happens when garbage is in the water. So we're very pleased about that. Also, through our relationship with the North American Maritime Ministry Association, that's the organization of port chaplains and port centers, we've been able to distribute 12,000 copies of the American Club's environmental crimes poster. And that's the one on the top, and it basically says, if you put on oil in the water, you will go to jail. Next, please. In port communities, we distribute our educational materials. We've got this in two formats, the one poster size, and then you saw the trifold of our MARPOL brochures. We have distributed over 100,000 copies. We're closer to 200,000, and as you know, now they're in Spanish. And we also host regional events consistent with what's important to that location. Next. With students, we partner with NOAA to create new STEM-enhanced educational materials. We're working on marine debris right now, and if you go to our website, you can download all the materials and use them locally. You'll find training guides and activities for the students. We do K through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12. In terms of our grading system. Partners of ours include Sea Research Foundation, the Coast Guard, and various maritime academies. We also have a drawing contest with Sea Research Foundation and the Jason Project. Last year we reached 2.5 million students with that program, and we also co-sponsor a marine science fair. Now, just so you know, this drawing contest, because it's on the web, it's available to all students. We had one of our winners was actually from the Philippines, and she is a closet art contest entrant, and she received an award in Florida, and they flew her over from the Philippines along with her mother and 2 of her siblings, and they were able to come up to Connecticut to be reunited with their father for the first time in 10 years. He'd been in the United States for 10 years, sending money back home to support his family. Next. And we also work with boys and girls clubs around the United States. We're working with the New England Science and Sailing Center along with Mystic Aquarium and other aquariums. We participate in Ocean Conservancy's International Coastal Cleanup. We're sort of the portal for the marine industry. In terms of encouraging shipping companies and ports to get involved in the international coastal cleanup. And the really cool thing about this particular beach cleanup is that you catalog all of your what you're cleaning up, the cigarette butts, the cans, the plastic bags, etc. And you submit that to Ocean Conservancy. They do an annual report which is submitted to the United Nations, and that becomes the definitive document on marine debris and its impacts. And we're continuing to develop new materials all the time to distribute through North America and the Caribbean. Last October, we launched our NMEPA Junior website featuring Morgan the manatee. Thank you. And we have a robust internship program. Last year we had a total of 9 interns, and that's helpful because they leave us and they go back to their colleges and universities, and they become disciples of MEPA, and they help us carry the message. Next. So we've got a lot of partnerships and strategic alliances, the Coast Guard and their auxiliary and their Sea Partners program. NOAA, the American Salvage Association, the IMO is a partner, OAS SIP. Sea Research Foundation, National Geographic, Intertanko and BIMCO, Ocean Conservancy, Wildlife Conservation Society, and more. Next. So in 2014, we are going to continue to expand our partnerships. We hope that many of you will be interested in becoming a partner with NMEPA. We're developing original STEM-enhanced curriculum with science, technology, engineering, and math. And our goal is to distribute our programs and our materials nationally and internationally in multiple languages and to develop college chapters. We just want to get the word out. We want to work with you to help you and your communities protect the marine environment. Next. So, our bywords: advocate, educate, activate. And I thank you very much for your attention. Now, again, don't look at your agenda, because what we've done is we've decided we're going to enhance what was reflected on the agenda. So the speakers wanted to talk to you a little more specifically about what they feel you would really like to hear. So I think we'll start with Matt Thomas, and Matt's going to talk to us about compliance risk management for ports. I'm sorry, yes.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Since you...
I mean, I'm so good at asking questions, I need to take them too.
Yeah. You seems to be a strong advocate for protection for the maritime environment. What would you say, considering that the Caribbean area or the wider Caribbean should be considered for PSSA status? And would you, how would you advise to assist the Caribbean area in light of the Basel Convention?
Okay.
One of the areas that I would suggest would be the marine debris area. And I don't want to get in, I know what your focus is. He's waiting for me to say ballast water management. But particularly sensitive areas, I think we need to look at the marine debris component, and that's something that comes from multiple sources. With the MARPOLs, particularly with the change to MARPOL 5, we're seeing less coming from ships, but there's still the runoff and there's still the debris coming from land sources. So I would think that is a big consideration. We're certainly the Caribbean is getting into more of an ECA situation, emission control area, and that is something that we're starting to see globally. As you know, January 15th, North America will require 0.1% sulfur. So that's something that's growing organically. But again, we're looking at, marine debris is a big factor. I'm not going to touch your ballast water management right now because I know you're going to handle it. And we also, let's see what Matt has to say about what our ports should be looking at in terms of compliance.
And the Basel Convention issues, because a lot of ships, they do pass through our area, and they do really trade hazardous waste, not ship-generated waste, but hazardous waste, and sell it off to poorer or lesser fortunate countries. What can we do about this?
I'm going to turn that over to David because he sits at IMO and I don't. Basel
Convention. Transboundary shipment of hazardous waste. And there are some particular ones that are mentioned in the convention. It is a problem. I don't know who of the in the delegations are signers to Basel Convention. The U.S. Is not, but the U.S. has very strong regulations under EPA regulations for import and export of any kind of materials that are hazardous. Probably more stringent than Basel Convention. But it is a problem, and I think we can talk a little bit about it in my own presentation, which we'll touch upon that, and I'm going to mostly focus on MARPOL. MARPOL does mention hazardous materials, mainly those that are ship generated. But it only discusses those in the guidelines. Other wastes, and we'll get into this. Other wastes, there are all kinds of special categories, and there are all kinds of special situations that each country has. Whether you're a small island state, such as many of those in the Caribbean region and elsewhere in the world, or whether you're a large state with and every country, every member of the IMO and countries not members of the IMO, each has special circumstances, and they wish to have special protections for their own citizens, and that's right and proper. Basel Convention gives us some guidelines. We should all do that, but we all have a responsibility to legislate, and if that means implementing, and that's something I'm going to speak to directly, and will include hazmats in that, but each country has an obligation to implement international regulations as they come and to participate in that. I'm not sure I answered exactly your question, but that's the direction that we need to take. We'll touch upon that, I think, a little bit further in our discussions, and certainly as we go through the program.
Thank you.
Are we all set? Oh, excellent. Thanks. My name's Matt Thomas. I'm a partner with Blank Rome here in Washington, D.C. I've been in Washington 20-some years as an attorney working in the maritime regulatory area, first with the U.S. government, with the Federal Maritime Commission, and then later in private practice. In my practice, I represent a broad range of commercial actors in the shipping industry: ports, ship owners, charterers, commodity trading and cargo interests, in insurers. And so I've been very fortunate in my career to see the issues that confront the maritime industry from several different commercial perspectives. And I particularly like the maritime industry and these issues because for the system to work well or to work at all, every individual actor across the globe, across different sectors, has to work together and do their part. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of transition we're in some environmental compliance areas, and what it means for ports, in particular port reception facilities. We're in a very interesting time with changes to MARPOL NX5 involving garbage, MARPOL NX6 involving air quality. But at the same time, we are coming out of a very, very challenging economic time for the ship owning industry and for ports and infrastructure development, and for many commodities sectors, where companies have felt a lot of financial pressure and stress, and haven't had the resources to invest aggressively in meeting the challenges that are hitting in 2013, 2014, 2015 in these compliance areas. I'll move through some of these things very kind of quickly. I understand David's probably going to touch on the MARPOL NX5 thing in issues in more of a deep dive, and he's certainly massively more of an expert in those than me. So I won't step on his thing. But let me just try and make a few commercial points about risk and how this impacts some of our clients. Could I get the next slide, please? So, as you know, The Act to Prevent Pollution from Ships implements MARPOL in the United States, and with annexes covering oil, garbage, air quality, sewage, noxious cargoes, and these all become positive law when under the Act to Prevent Pollution from Ships. They become positive law in the United States when they become part of MARPOL. The important parts of this scheme for the U.S. is not just limits on discharges, but also implementing aggressive reporting and monitoring and record keeping requirements. These are an essential part of compliance, an essential part of what my clients have to worry about. And the enforcement options are extremely high in this area, especially for our ship owner clients. The potential risks for MARPOL noncompliance, of course, you can have ship detentions and operational delays. You can have penalties in port state control situations where vessels are detained, or penalties referral to the flag state. But in the United States, we also have a great deal of experience with prosecuting MARPOL violations criminally, particularly in the oil discharge context, where we've seen fines into the millions and tens of millions and prison terms as well. These are enormously disruptive and troubling and challenging for the industry, and something that we have to take into account all the time. Can I get the next slide, please? Okay. Focusing for a minute on the revised MARPOL Annex 5, covering garbage. It entered into effect at the beginning of last year. It was approved in 2011 and imposed strict garbage management procedures and documentation on all vessels. But it really represents a paradigm shift or a reversal of philosophy for the treatment of garbage and discharges. Whereas under the old regime, there was a presumption that garbage could be discarded at sea. The new regulations prohibit all discharges except for certain specified categories. Food wastes, cargo residues that are not hazardous to the marine environment, operational wastes, carcasses of animals. Can I get the next slide, please? There is oh, sorry, that didn't render quite right. But we have the IMO has put out a very helpful chart that shows the new standards outside of special areas and inside special areas, and of course with the Caribbean Basin special area. I think this group, the restrictions on the even more aggressive restrictions on special areas are definitely worth focusing on and worrying about. But the implementation of these new standards have really posed a challenge for port reception facilities and for ports to accommodate these kinds of wastes. Just to give you an example, down the bottom of this chart, we see a big long list and a big field of red where things are prohibited, and we've got any broad range of cooking oil, packaging materials, floating dunnage, and crockery, bottles, refuse, and things that you wouldn't even think about have become a significant issue. Floating dunnage, for example, wooden dunnage and packaging materials. They're not allowed to be discharged at sea in a special area or even outside a special area. And this is an issue where we have colliding regulatory requirements. Because because of agricultural controls on pests that can infest untreated wood that's being brought into the country, there's aggressive oversight of efforts to bring these wooden dunnage into the country, and we are seeing significant challenges with ports not having facilities or capacity to manage some of these things coming on board. So the lessons for some of these things is look at where you have intersecting or overlapping regulatory requirements, and it's really not enough just to look on the surface and see, well, does a port have an approved waste reception facility? Does it have a certificate of adequacy? You really need to think 2 steps ahead and improve communication and coordination to try to get at some of these issues. Can I get the next slide, please? Well, just to move through this quickly, the Coast Guard has put out rules that have implemented the Annex 5 revisions, and these focus on updated operational requirements and definitions and placarding. But let's move to the next slide. The interim rule incorporates this prohibition on the discharge of garbage into the sea, and implements these new definitions of cargo residue, cooking oil, and other things. Let's get the next slide, though. Let's get to some sort of interesting stuff. What I see as some of the really key challenges in this area is this new treatment of cargo residues. Cargo residues, whether entrained in wastewater or not. The conventions authorize the discharge of some of those things, but we are in a transitional period where we are trying to come up with a consensus and rules and standards, understanding about what cargo residues can be discharged and what cannot. The threshold here is it harmful for the marine environment? Are these things HME? And we are looking to UN globally harmonized system classifications for labeling of chemicals for deciding, is it harmful or is it not? But this puts a great burden onto shippers, because shippers are responsible for classifying these cargoes. The ship owner has to rely on the shipper classifications. We as an industry are moving towards hopefully getting a more rigorous harmonized schedule and more predictability in this area. But this is an area where there seems to be a great deal of risk and uncertainty. And this is particularly important, we're saying, to our clients in the mining, metals, and materials sectors, because it's not just enough to look and say, okay, we have a cargo of ore, or we have a cargo of copper, and so we know we can or can't discharge the cargo residues. A very specific examination has to look at what has come out of the ground, what has gone into the ship, what chemicals are there, and what aren't, and do they meet these standards for what's carcinogenic or what has reproductive toxicity. So it requires better attention in commercial contracting, better communications, integration between ports and reception facilities, ship owners, and charterers. And that's a lot of what I do and what I focus on. Trying to figure out who is going to bear the risk of delay, who's going to bear the risk of the ship not being allowed into port. the ship's not allowed to load because the holds can't be washed, because there aren't facilities to take that wastewater water out. Who is the shipper has misclassified or hasn't guessed right as to whether these cargoes can be discharged or not. This is something that commercial parties have to negotiate over who bears these risks. And the best way to manage those risks is for people to talk about it well in advance. Shippers, ship owners, marine terminals, port reception facilities, the exchange of information and seeing these things so it doesn't happen while the vessel is on demurrage. So this is some of the things we're worrying about. Can I get the next slide, please? The IMO has put out just a nice little short paper last year about guide to good practice for port reception facilities, and the focus is on vessels. Vessels need to focus more on advanced planning, logistical and commercial arrangements to manage risks, better communication, just minimizing waste in their operations. And facilities need to focus on the same things: communication, better integration, organization with their shoreside operations. If you collect these wastes, whether it's Annex 1 wastes, oil, or whether it's new Annex 6 wastes from scrubbers, do the facilities have something to do with this? And there's a much more increased focus on documentation. I thought it was telling and slightly ironic that our great speaker from MARAD noted the increased burdens of workload and things on persons working on the ships and on the crew, and the impact that can have, because each of these environmental obligations comes with an enormously sort of complicated and rigorous and significant reporting and record-keeping obligation. So we never see the pendulum swing in the other way, in the other direction when it comes to these documentation requirements. Could I get the next slide? So, as I noted, the stakes are just very high in this. We have a broad range of enforcement options and penalties that can go against the vessel, that can go against individual crew members, that can go against various interests. And so, while the vessel is often in the crosshairs of the enforcement action, the problem really can't just be a vessel problem, because the vessels don't have the information necessarily themselves, or can't solve the problems themselves. It really does require coordination with ports and with waste facilities, and requires coordination with shippers. It's really a trade issue, almost more than a shipping issue. If all these the mining sector has been floating statistics saying up to 80% of port facilities don't have the appropriate capacity to deal with these things. And while that may impact ships in the first instance, it impacts trade. It impacts locally jobs and businesses in the petroleum and petrochemical sector, and mining and materials and development. It impacts people's supply chain and the reliability to get cargo places. So it really isn't just about what's on the ships. It's about the ability for local industries and business to be able to rely on maritime transportation to get the job done. So, next slide, or done? Yeah. Oftentimes for us it comes down comes down to penalties. But I think I really enjoy my job the most when we're working with people at the front end to try to solve these problems, share some risks, and head things off at the front end. Okay, last slide. Thank you all very much for a few minutes to come and talk about some of these issues with you. It's been a very interesting day, and I look forward to hearing what the rest of the panel has to say.
Thank you.
Now, before turning over to David, I want to tell you something, that David is not only with the United States Coast Guard, but he was a sea captain and sailed as a master on for Maersk for many, many years. So he knows the pointy end from the blunt end and has become an expert within the Coast Guard on port facilities and waste management. David?
Thank you, Carlene, and thanks, Matt, for that great introduction to at least one side of the story. As Carlene mentioned, I did come from a sailing background. I still hold a Master Mariner's License Unlimited and work for Maersk and other companies, and did some work down in the Gulf of Mexico, out in every ocean that you could name. I see some of my colleagues here in uniform. I would love to have worn mine. But I am a civilian with the Coast Guard now, so I'm driving a desk at the moment. I could be called back to sea at any second, and I would gladly spend the rest of my life on the bridge wing of a ship. Our oceans are important, and they're important to keep clean. And thanks to Carlene, who's doing a great job at keeping the rest of us in line, including and I guess I have to classify myself as a bureaucrat now. I am representing the government on this panel, but I've got some experience at sea. And I bring that to the Coast Guard. I saw a lot of garbage going over the side, and prior to, as Matt suggested, prior to the 1st of January 2013, when the new MARPOL regulations came into effect for Annex 5, it was a paradigm shift. And I remember looking at my colleagues on international committees working on this. What should we do? Should we have a list of things that you can't put in? Should we not have a list? Should we just prohibit everything? And that's basically what it came to. It came to a paradigm shift. Don't put it in the ocean. You don't throw it overboard, whatever it is. A few things, obviously, for health reasons, garbage, but even that has some special conditions to put garbage overboard. We all know we have to do that, and but it's got to be done in a particular way. So we'll look at some of those, I think, and that's what this panel is about. Carlene mentioned things like marine debris. Obviously, and I don't, you said the majority of it is still from land-based, but about 20% of it, at least as of a 2009 National Academies of Science report, and I was on the panels that developed that report, about 20% came from, at least, and I'd like to think that it doesn't anymore, from ships and shipping, although there's still some of that marine debris is coming from ships, and that's marine debris. We're talking about Annex 5. Obviously, the other annexes. We'll get into some of that in a moment. So I come here with some experience, not just as a regulator, not just as a part of the enforcement arm, as our colleague from Maritime mentioned. The Coast Guard does enforcement. But I come here with a background. I come here with a love of the ocean. I come here with experience as a master aboard ships all over the world. So with that, when I came to the Coast Guard, after actually a couple of years at the Maritime Administration, when I came ashore, I guess they decided, well, here's a sailor. He's been out there. He's been on ships. Maybe he knows something about putting garbage into the ocean and what we need to do. So here's a couple of programs they gave to me. by way of background from the Coast Guard, and although I think I knew this intuitively, but the Coast Guard's, one of the Coast Guard's core mission is, of course, environmental protection, and has been since 1790, since its inception. So marine environmental protection is high on the list. It is one of the 5 core missions, the others being those traditional ones that perhaps you hear more about, search and rescue, and those other activities that we hear about in the news. So environmental protection is very important, and I can assure you that the Commandant, and Carlene knows the Commandant better than I do, I think, but the Commandant, it's high on his list. It's high on the Director of the Prevention Division, Admiral Servideo. So it is part of and of the one of the highest priorities of the Coast Guard in terms of what we need to do. That comes down to, and I guess I need the, I'm used to having my own slide here. Could I have the next slide, please? So, as I mentioned, it's a core mission. And so what does the Coast Guard want to do? And MARPOL, as we've heard, and the U.S. Coast Guard they're linked. They can't be separated because the Act to Prevent Pollution from Ships, which we heard about, tells the Secretary under which the Coast Guard operates, and that happens to be the Department of Homeland Security, the Secretary at the moment, tells the Secretary to tell the Coast Guard to implement MARPOL. MARPOL is the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships, of course, and the U.S. is signatory to MARPOL, at least Annex 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. Incidentally, not Annex 4, which is sewage, because the U.S. under the EPA regulations has its own very strong sewage regulations which meet and or exceed that. So, but those annexes to which we are signatory, the 2 mandatory ones, which are chemical, Annex 2, and oil, Annex 1, and then Annex 5 and Annex 6, which is air, which is also mandatory. So the Coast Guard does its bit, and it's mainly, as we heard from our colleague from the Maritime Administration, it's mainly in the enforcement area. All of the other regulatory agencies and advocacy agencies like MARAD, EPA, that have and have a great deal of input to, and also many of them have regulations that are meant to enhance and implement international regulations here in the U.S. Look to the Coast Guard to enforce those, and rightly so, because the Coast Guard has the assets here in the U.S. And I think in many of your delegations it falls to the Coast Guard and the port authorities and designated agencies within your countries. What are we all looking to do? We're looking to, and as I mentioned, promote safety and environmental stewardship. That's the basis right here. And it's, of course, marine environmental stewardship is mainly what we're talking about. To encourage pollution prevention, internationally, nationally, and locally. This is how it works. What's that catchphrase that environmentalists always use? Think globally, act locally. Well, I mean, this is what needs to be done. It starts very small. It's each individual crew member on board a ship. It's each person that's operating a port or that works at a port to carry out all of these things. You know, one thing I like to say is that this business of managing wastes, it's not so much complicated. It's not rocket science. Lots of technology, of course, can be brought to play, but we know what this technology is. It isn't sending somebody to the moon. It's known. But there are lots of parts and pieces to getting it right. And part of the this is part of the job of the Coast Guard to not only to enforce all these regulations, but also to promote, and that's why I'm here, is to promote best practices, to keep working on this, to keep outreach, to work with colleagues like Carlene and our other agency partners in industry and industry advocacy programs. So we do all of these things in order to make sure we get this right. So at least from the shipping sector, we're protecting the oceans. We also want to do it to keep industry moving. I heard this just a few minutes ago. We can't have every master of every ship has got a schedule to meet. You come into port, you can't have delays. This costs money. It costs money for your company. It's the bottom line. So we have to keep going. And this is something that comes up in international meetings at the highest levels. How to do this, how to write regulations that aren't going to burden industry so much that it's impossible to operate. Of course, it comes down to the consumer of those goods that are on board, whatever it is. There are commodities on board. Do we want to make it so prohibitively expensive to market these? No, of course we don't. And part of that equation is how much is it going to cost to get from one part of the globe to the other. We know that this is here. You know, I was just saying to Jorge just a little while ago when I came in. It was great to see him again, and I said, you know, this economic engine that we call the Americas, North America, Central America, South America, from the Straits of Magellan to Nome. This all operates mainly because of the great maritime collaboration that we have in this hemisphere and outwardly. I mean, it's fully 95%, they say, that's the figure that comes out, of trade goes by the maritime trades. That's where all of the materials go. So it's very important. However, one of the other things that we need to do is that we need to encourage all of these best practice methodologies and to use, and I mentioned technology in working with industry, our partners, and not just our America's partners, but clearly our partners around the world. The one thing that is not on this bullet list, next slide, is the enforcement piece. Enforcement is enforcement. Next slide. So I talked about the IMO and what the IMO has to do, and that's really where it starts. The IMO has been has known that management of ships waste. This is something that was recognized as a problem, and as soon as you start regulating or restricting or trying to tell the shipping industry how to manage waste aboard ship, the first question they're going to ask, and they're still asking it, and this started in the first Marine Environment Protection Committee meeting, I believe, was in MEPC 1 was in 1972. By 1973, they were already asking about it. What are we going to do with the trash on board the ships? You don't want us to put it in the ocean? What are we going to do with it? You don't want us to discharge our oil? What are we going to do with it? How are we going to manage it? And the answer was, oh, well, you have to put it at the ports. That's why we're sitting here, and we're still trying to figure out the best ways to do that. Matt mentioned a Guide to Good Practice. Let's see, 1973 to, somebody do the math here, 2006, 2007, whatever, 35, 40 years almost. The Guide to Good Practice for reception facilities. That's a piece, and we've just revised that, but that didn't come out until 2007. Why did it take so long? Right now, I'm working on regulations that haven't been looked at the Coast Guard. That's part of my other job, to implement regulations. We've been doing this for a while. This is a slow process. One of the reasons why we work with IMO, and the Coast Guard heads that delegation, but why the U.S. works with IMO in the international arena, is so that we can get it right. We can get it right for everyone, and we can work with our colleagues to come up with some kind of consensus. Let's look a little bit specifically about the IMO guidance that gives member states. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, because I see you have it up there, and one of the challenges, especially for developing ports, is the ability to be able to adequately have facilities for them to deal with the domestic situation, far less to have the added burden of taking from ocean-going vessels. And that is a serious challenge. Based on where I speak from, and by the way, I'm from Dominica, the issue of just the solid waste itself poses a problem, because, again, there is the other side of it where one talks about protecting the environment, and given the nature of the country where you set up or establish these reception facilities can have other impacts. And so it is a very difficult proposition sometimes for territories like ours. And then to talk about liquid waste, it then begins to add a further challenge. And I know at present that these are things that we are grappling with. So really and truly, it's taking some time, as you pointed out, but it may even create further pressures on the small economies such as ours to be able to have to grapple with initiatives such as this without technical and other assistance being provided. So I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, and actually we're going to talk about adequacy and some of those very challenges, and also some proposals that are on the table that might help mitigate some of those challenges for states like Dominica and others.
Thank you, Captain Condino. So it was a pleasure to have you. No, I just wanted to make a comment to Benoit's question or comment as well, and that is that, and the seminar that we met, actually, they organized by David and the IMO, and where Carlene and I met, was a seminar in Fort Lauderdale on port reception facilities. And it was especially, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was especially tailored like this is for the English-speaking Caribbean, correct? And there were, representatives there. And I had to, I was new to the job, and this was something that really, as I began to read up on it, and what is this and what happens. And I had a conversation with one of the cruise line representatives, and I'll say, as we say in Spanish, decimos el pecado, pero no el pecador. We'll tell you the sin, but not the sinner. So the sin is that as we were speaking on the need, especially on the Caribbean basin, because of the cruise lines and the potential that this represents, to have, certain ports don't have adequate port reception facilities to dispose, whether it's solid or liquid waste or whatnot. And so the ship moves on to another port. And as I was speaking with this gentleman from one of the cruise lines, he said, you know what? It's getting to the point where we have actually identified some ports that can receive our waste and our trash and ours. But the problem is that once they receive it, and they do receive it properly, they can't dispose of it properly. And that creates, like you just said, Benoit, an additional problem for a developing economy. So what they've decided to do until this situation changes is actually just to take everything back home to them, to Miami, where there's an industry in recycling. And so they sell the recycling to a company who in turn sells it again for profit to recycling plastic and so forth. So cruise ships today, and I was taken to a tour, there's a guy in the cruise ships, this is going to blow your mind, that his job is to get the lime out of the Corona bottle. Seriously, I thought he was kidding, but he's not. This is the guy's job, and he gets the bottle and he smashes it and gets the lime and throws it into the organic, and he gets that crystal, that glass, and puts it into the clear crystal pile. And they have a brown crystal pile and a green crystal pile, and they have plastic piles and paper and cardboard and organics and oily water separators and so on. And so they do everything on board, so that when they get back to home port, they can offload all this waste and all this trash, but with the certainty that the person who or the company who they're giving it to will dispose of it properly in turn. So much like with my example earlier of multimodal transportation, where you can have the best port in the world to offload all your stuff, but then if you don't move it from there appropriately to the rest of your country, it does you little good. And I think same thing here. This issue of waste disposal or management needs to be considered as a gestalt, as a bigger picture. Because if you only look at the individual parts, one of them might work, but it's always just a part of a bigger whole. And so with this issue of port reception facilities, I believe that there is a lot of potential, especially for the nations that we're developing nations, in order to not only deal with it appropriately, but make an industry, make some money out of it. Anyway, just a quick comment there.
Thank you, Jorge. And we're going to talk about some of those very specific issues as we move along here. So anyway, starting with the big picture here, what does IMO actually say? What does MARPOL actually say? MARPOL provisions require the government of each party to ensure the provision of adequate port reception facilities without causing undue delay. That's simple, right? Take the garbage and deal with it. However, some things that we have been discussing over the past decade or so, we really have to think not just of the shipper, but of the reception facility, of the countries that it's being received in. What are the wider implications from cradle to grave management of waste that comes from ships, that get generated aboard ships, right from your suppliers that put the stores on board to the eventual disposal of the waste at and beyond the pier where the reception facility is. Failure to establish adequate reception facilities, and we'll talk about adequacy in a minute, it's a breach of international obligations and will increase the risk of illegal discharges from ships. And ship operators will favor ports with good services at reasonable cost. That's what IMO guidance says. And that guidance is in 1999 guidance, which is we've worked on providing an update to that. But it's the same principles here. Next slide, please. Here in the U.S., and as I mentioned when I started speaking, that it's the obligation of each country to implement MARPOL with their own national legislation. This is how the U.S. does it. And we're going to speak pretty specifically about port reception facilities. So the U.S. incorporates MARPOL, Port Reception Facility, PRF, regulations in the Act to Prevent Pollution of Ships, which is already mentioned. And it's codified in our regulations under 33 CFR 158. That's a regulation that my office at the Coast Guard owns, updates, writes, and makes sure that it's implemented properly and will enforce it. There was a question over here, and by the way, anybody that's got any questions as we move along, this is, I think, what we're meant to do, Jorge, to stimulate. This is a two-way discussion here, so.
The contracting parties, member states of IMO, their responsibility is to provide port reception facilities. Would that facilities, would that be, you have a service provider, maybe come with a tank wagon, could that be considered as a port reception in light of what my good friend said that with MEPC 1 Circular 617 that he mentioned with the advanced notification forms. So both of them tagging and in tandem can that suffice?
Yes, and just incidentally, the guidance that was mentioned, Circular 671. It has been updated now to incorporate all of the new regulations. That original guidance was guidance that was written by a working group under the U.S. chairmanship. I was the chair of that group, and it's excellent guidance. It does there, and yes, it will suffice. However, our colleague from the Dominica delegation mentioned something very interesting, and it's something that we discussed down in Miami. It's something that's been discussed for some time. How about if you don't have the capacity, if you're a small island nation, you can't handle the waste, you don't, it's just almost impossible. There are some special circumstances for, especially for small island states or states that don't have the land mass, they don't have the facility to accept it and or dispose of the waste from ships. Some interesting things happened a few years ago, and I was on that committee also. The U.S. took part in it and accepted it. Regional arrangements, and this is something that Jorge just mentioned. Regional arrangements, having a scheme in place whereby you don't have to put in every port that you visit, especially in a port, say, in a Caribbean small island nation, you don't have to put your waste there. It doesn't necessarily have to have a traditional reception facility. What it needs is a system by which waste is managed aboard ships, like the cruise industry has done. They've been in the forefront of this. Or ships have the capacity to take it to the next port, and that port is identified in a plan. And it's a plan whereby states, bilaterally or multilaterally, can arrange to have a reception facility centrally located, regionally located, that can and will accept it. And oftentimes there are economic incentives to do this. Port of origin for the ship. It goes out, it goes to a destination, comes back. It manages on board the waste that it generates, and it redelivers it to the port. These are schemes that are workable, already in place on a commercial basis, and can hopefully can be incorporated in international and national legislation that will make this in effect work. Anyway, so we'll may mention that here and just in a little more in a great discussion here that we have going. Anyway, and as we go along, other countries obviously have their own national legislation. I've looked at many of them and worked with colleagues from all around the world, all around the Americas. South and Central America and Canada have regulations that are slight variations on this, both in their environmental environmental regulations and in their maritime environmental regulations. So it is up to each country that is party to MARPOL to implement those. The U.S. does it. Next slide. The U.S. does it with its Certificate of Adequacy program. Matt just mentioned this. It's a robust program in the U.S. It happens to be the program that my office runs. As I mentioned, MARPOL and the U.S. Act to Prevent Pollution from Ships applies to both ships and to ports and terminals. So we're talking about the port and terminal aspect of it. And that one major requirement is for port reception facilities. Next slide. So in the U.S., as we've implemented MARPOL, who must have it and who must apply? Well, 33 CFR 158 says to continue to receive ships, a port or terminal must hold one or more certificates of adequacy. We'll look at those variations in the certificates. They basically are the MARPOL annexes. Oil, noxious liquid substance, garbage, and air residues from air pollutants aboard ship. So, 33 CFR 158.40 to continue to receive ships at a port or terminal required by 158.135. The person in charge must apply to the Coast Guard for a certificate of adequacy. That's the way it works here. It means if you don't do that, you're in trouble. Where are we? Next slide. So, in terms of specific applicability, I won't go through all of these, but there's information here. Jorge, we're going to have this as all the presentations are available for all of the delegates. Yeah. So you can refer back to this certainly. But Annex 1, that's the oil. It follows IMO, what it is. It applies to ships over 400 gross tons. Annex 2, noxious liquid substances, liquid chemicals. As opposed to something that might be harmful to the marine environment in a dry chemical. Dry chemicals are treated much differently, different lists and whatnot, even though, you know, they're certainly all harmful. But liquid chemicals, there's a special category, has its own annex. Annex 5, garbage. And there are some specific requirements. In the U.S. and everyone else, Annex 5 applies to every single kind of ship. And what is a ship? Basically anything that could go on the water that you could stand on. A windsurfer with a banana tucked into his swim trunks has got to take that peel. It can't go in the water. At least within 3 miles where he would be in the U.S., and it's got to be ground up in a special area. We'll talk about some of that later. But if you can get on it and go from point A to point B on a surfboard or a 1,000-foot tanker, there are some restrictions, okay, on what you can put in the water. And Annex 6, we talked about air, and Carlene mentioned air, and our colleague from Blank Grove mentioned new air pollution regulations for ships. The two that require reception facilities are stack scrubber residues and ozone depletion substances. Fortunately, in the U.S., ozone depletion substances are regulated by the EPA. In the U.S., you can't discharge ozone depletion substances. These are things like refrigerants. Of course, ships have lots of refrigerants on board. They have to be handled especially, and there are regulations that we have. Now, the Coast Guard has got to regulate those, and we have to ensure that ports have reception facilities to take those, but they are regulated by the EPA in the U.S. and other countries. I believe Mexico has some pretty stringent regulations on that, and I'm sure there are other regulatory schemes in other countries. But you do have to handle those. So ODSs. The other one is stack scrubber residues, and stack scrubber residues are sort of in the realm right at the moment of dry cargo residues that are being classified or in the process of being classified as harmful to the marine environment. We haven't really classified stack scrubber residues. And what are they? A scrubber is obviously, you know, on land, scrubber technology has been around for quite a while. One good example, power plants. You don't see the smoke rising from power plants anymore because they have scrubbers in there. Mainly one of the main technologies is water vapor in the stack. It collects particulate matter and you get a sludge out of it. The sludge drains down, it gets collected, and that's what you want to dispose of. There are other technologies out there, but there are technological solutions there. But there are residues. We're taking it out of the stack emissions, and we have to put it at where? You're going to make us do this. I'm the ship owner now. Where's the reception facility? So we're working on this. The U.S., that regulation did come into effect in 2013. There will be more stringent with ECAs, emission control areas that are already in place in the Caribbean and also up in the Northwest and the Pacific. Emission control areas, something is going to have to be done because you're not going to be able to use those. And if technology, if one technology that you're going to use is stack scrubbers, then they're going to have to be reception facilities. We'll have to classify those and figure out what to do with them. Next slide, please. So now you mentioned the penalties. They increase those. I've got 25,000 now. It goes to 40,000. Let me revise that. I want that extra 15 grand. Anyway, part of the enforcement. The main point here is that it could get expensive. This is also for, this applies to, it's the same regulation. It applies to reception facilities. You don't have it, you could get in trouble. So if those of you that are operating within your ports, that are port officials, this is what we do over here. We can resort to stiff fines. We could go as far as we wanted to. So it's not just for shippers. Next slide, please. So what can port reception facilities be? And we had a couple of comments already and questions. You know, does it have to be in the traditional sense? Does it have to be at the port? Well, starting out with what it looks like from an overall perspective, could be a private company, could be a waterfront facility, landowner, could be the pier owner, the basin, docks, or it could be a consortium of you know, quays and terminals. Could be a public enterprise. These could be privately owned. Could be a public enterprise or a combination. We have in the U.S. port authorities, which fall under some special legal regulations called an authority. It's a kind of a public-private partnership, managed privately perhaps, and the state or the federal government actually owns the land. So there are all kinds of combinations of these. Could be municipality owned, federal, state, or city owned, or operated. In the U.S., we don't set fees and costs. And that's an important consideration. Costs can be a factor, as we mentioned before. Next slide. Adequacy. We talked about adequacy. Mainly, adequacy is going to mean timeliness and capacity. I'm not going to go through all of these, but here are some of these. In red here outlined is quarantine waste. We'll talk about that in a second. Operational best practices. Just a few highlights here. National and local permitting schemes have to be. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, next slide. I'm used to having my own button.
Clicker.
It's okay. My fault.
He's a man
My
with his own
fault.
clicker.
So, national and local permitting schemes and licensing arranged so as not to interfere. Here you see, this is a reception facility here. It's a tank truck. They're offloading their oily waste. Must be conveniently located. Must also be situated so that nothing goes into the water at the ports. Next slide. Inadequacies. We mentioned this. Mainly inadequacies at a port. It's the responsibility of the IMO member state to ensure that they're there. So who's at fault really when there's an inadequacy? It's the IMO member state. And there are reporting schemes. Mainly they're issued under IMO circulars, and there's good guidance there. The Coast Guard in this country investigates every single one of those. I know because they usually fall on my desk and the Admiral says, what's the problem? Next slide, please. Some resources, and we're closing in on this, Jorge and Carlene. I promise I'll be done in a few minutes. I told you there were lots of parts and pieces here, and that's the problem. It's not rocket science, but there's a lot going on here. I want to point out to my colleagues and everybody here that that circular that was the original guidance document, has now been revised to incorporate all of these. It's now MEPC Circular 834. It should be on the IMO website. I was informed that it was going to be published on that very soon, if not already. No, the 2006, 6 or 7, whenever that was written. That's the one that Matt referred to. So there's a new one coming out. It's very good guidance, and it's there. It's got all of the forms, and mainly it's a reporting scheme. Other issues affecting porno, special sea areas. We talked about the wider Caribbean special area. We'll note that in a moment. ISO standards for shipboard and port reception facilities, and quarantine waste. All issues that need to be addressed. We mentioned wider Caribbean special area. It's a big area of the ocean.
Next slide.
Next slide, sorry. Thank you. Just keep up with me, will you? Thank you, Carly. Next slide. Nope. Yeah, there. So wider Caribbean special area. A big sea area. Next slide, please. So I mentioned ISO standards, ISO international standards. They are out there. We are working on them. The U.S. participates with its partners. ISO 21070, waste on board ships and waste handling. We mentioned managing waste. Next slide. Back one? Can we go back one for a question?
The number.
Oh, you'll have these on here, and I'll give them to you if you want. I have them. Okay. Where are we? 16304, ISO standard for waste handling at port reception facilities. More guidance. Quarantine waste. In the U.S., we have some very particular issues, and that was mentioned before with the dunnage. Dunnage can have, if it's not treated properly, can have pests in it that are regulated under another regulation. Those are other regulations by USDA. They're not Coast Guard regulations. So it becomes a matter for very special handling, like hazardous material that we spoke of before. Next slide. So what's the way forward? All right, we have to, next slide, please. Thank you. Adhering to best management practices, and we've mentioned a lot of those resources. Enhance record keeping, and Matt mentioned that. Embracing those cradle-to-grave concepts that I spoke about. Reduce, reuse, recycle. It has to be done. It's the only way we're going to be able to manage this. We need to distribute widely, and thanks to NMEPA and Carlene's work with organizations, both government and within industry and advocacy groups, we're getting the kind of distribution that we need, and we need to do more of it. And then working toward, we just need to keep waste from ships out of the ocean. We need to do everything that possible. Everybody's heard about the gyre in the middle of the Pacific. That isn't a tenth of the story. Most waste disintegrates in the ocean, but it stays there. We've got to do something about it. Here's my contact information, and I'll be here for the rest of the day. Next, thank you. Okay, I need you. Thank you. Anyway, that's all I have.
Thank you, David. That was a wonderfully comprehensive opportunity to get an overview of what needs to be done, where the areas of responsibility are, and what the sanctions are in case it doesn't happen. On-board vessel are seafarers that are trying to implement all of these regulations. And with us today is James Spear, who, as I mentioned, is a third mate, rising to be second mate, aboard a tanker that goes between San Francisco and Valdez. And James, I wanted to know, could you talk a little bit about the experience you have on board enforcing MARPOL regulations as a seafarer?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Mr. Duran, to Carlene, to the Inter-American Committee on Ports, and to the Organization of American States for allowing me to participate in today's panel discussion. It's humbling the amount of experience and expertise in the room, so I'm going to apologize in advance if what I say is repetitive. I'm sure it will be in some context. But when I was thinking about And I actually don't have a presentation or a slideshow. But when I was thinking about what I could talk about, I remembered a saying a while ago, and I don't remember exactly who it's attributed to, but there's essentially, as I've heard it, three types of people in the world. Those who are dead, those who are alive, and those who go to sea. Sort of those who are alive, those who are dead, and those who go to sea. And I think that really kind of sums up sort of how seafarers sometimes are interpreted as sort of an extension of the mechanisms of the ship. Sometimes they're overlooked, I think, as from being potential stakeholders in solving or addressing and being good stewards of the marine environment to, like I said, a mechanism on board the ship. With that in mind, I think from my perspective, there's really three challenges that the industry, that companies, and the maritime community face in trying to get seafarers as the front lines of marine environmental stewardship and protection on board the vessels. Three challenges they really face, and I think three things that maybe the ports around the country and around the world can offer, and that is guidance, and a challenge of guidance, a challenge of the work load and fatigue, and a challenge of what's often referred to as the criminalization of the seafarer. In terms of guidance, I think it's exceptional that organizations like NMEPA, and that's why I'm proud to be a volunteer member and a regional director of NMEPA when I'm at home, tries to get that information out about MARPOL Annex changes, about updates and regulations. And I would encourage ports and representatives of ports authorities and port organizations and member countries to make sure the information particular, if there is marine environmental regulations particular to that port, that gets to the ship, that gets to the company, that's adequately distributed in advance of the vessel's arrival. Because speaking only from my experience, myself and my colleagues don't want to pollute the marine environment. We want to be a key solution to the issue of it, to be good stewards of the environment that we frankly have the privilege to operate in. So I would suggest distribution of information. What also goes hand in hand with that is training. And the companies I work for I'm privileged to work for, to be tremendously proactive companies that require onboard computer-based trainings, what we refer to as CBTs, training regimes that really reinforce, in simple terms, what the ramifications are. Because, I mean, it's great to have charts and indexes and flow and information, but I don't have a law degree. I don't have a tremendous amount of educational background that would allow me to quickly and effectively absorb it, because frankly, as anybody who's gone to sea knows, that your day is so busy with stuff, that you're loaded with so much work that you need the information quickly and effectively. And that's where I think the NGOs and partners of NMEPA have very successfully come up with things like the American Club's poster and information that distributes the message. In terms of work and fatigue, I would say that paper management, effective management of the paperwork, by using best available technology that allows for effective management of the volumes of paper that I'm low on the totem pole, but that I'm responsible for, let alone the senior officers on board, and it only increases. I would also say, excuse me a second, I was jotting down my notes. A real challenge that what I've seen in the two companies that I've worked for that are very safety conscious is that as their companies become, safer over time because of best practices, because of effective safety management programs, which obviously have the added benefit or the intended benefit of protecting the marine environment. But as those systems and those things work, there are less people in the organization who have firsthand experience with marine disasters, with incidents. And so that raw emotional feeling of that a marine incident brings up, those individuals who have that experience eventually, you know, retire, move on, something like that. And as the company becomes safer, there are less of those individuals in the organization who have that firsthand experience. So what the organizations are challenged with, the companies, in my experience, are challenged with, is how do you maintain that buy-in? How, as a new third mate, fresh out of SUNY Maritime College, how do they get the point across to me? I really buy into the program? And I would submit that's through the mentoring, strong mentoring from ashore, strong mentoring and information sharing opportunities such as this very conference and workshop, and through strong mentoring on board from senior officers down to junior officers. And that, like I said, flows from ashore to the to shipboard, and then within the shipboard structure from senior command down to, you know, the junior command. So that way you do flawlessly execute every time whatever cycle that the vessel is going through, including and most importantly protection of the crew and the marine environment. I was at a risk mitigation conference and summit a couple of months ago, and I heard I was in the port of Tampa, Florida, and I heard a gentleman speaking who had given a presentation like this before about their experiences. They profiled a couple of incidents that had happened in the port and how all of the local stakeholders had come together effectively and really seamlessly to address the issue. And the gentleman speaking there, who was with the Marine Fire Division, he had said that the time to exchange business cards is not at the scene of the incident. And through those kind of conferences and conferences very much like this, the networking, the sharing of information, the exchanging of business cards, and the relationships that develop really will, in my opinion, and just my opinion, but will really help to offer a phenomenal response should the unfortunate event of a marine incident ever occur. And that's what I would hope as a seafarer that my company has done. And I, like I said, I have the opportunity to work for companies that very much do that. But I would hope that my company would do that. I would hope that the ports we call on do that. And I would hope that the regulators and the industry support organizations do that as well. And that's all I have for right now. Are there any questions?
Yes, sir.
Gracias. Yo felicito a todos los compañeros del panel, muy bonitas proyecciones. Yo le quisiera decir al capitán Condino que en México, sobre todo en Veracruz, yo soy el capitán de puerto de Veracruz, desde hace muchos años, especialmente unos 4, hemos sido demasiado estrictos con el cumplimiento del MARPOL. Hay varios proveedores que se dedican exclusivamente a la recolección de estos materiales de residuos aceitosos y que son checados muy de cerca por las autoridades ambientalistas para certificar que lleguen a destinos autorizados para su desecho final. También es cierto que en cumplimiento a la OMI hay una circular de hace varios años donde se prohíbe a los buques botar aguas de lastre, sobre todo en las bahías, de barcos que vienen de aguas contaminadas, especialmente las asiáticas, que se les prohíbe totalmente botar aguas de lastre. También al compañero Marino, comentarle que desde hace 2 años en Veracruz, que ha sido pionero en una plataforma electrónica llamada Mediport, que es un puerto sin papeles. Hoy los arribos y los despachos de buques los hacemos en 10 minutos, ya no es presencial como en el pasado. Lo que se ha ahorrado en los últimos 14,000 trámites es un promedio de 23,000 árboles y muchísimos litros de gasolina. Lo que queremos es que a través de estos medios electrónicos le simplifiquemos al capitán del buque y a su tripulación tantos trámites burocráticos que en realidad son muy engorrosos y que hoy en día estamos hablando casi ya un 30, 40% menos de autoridades que abordan el buque como estaba en el pasado. Ya la autoridad marítima, la autoridad aduanera y la autoridad sanitaria ya no vamos a las embarcaciones, todo lo hacemos a través de los medios electrónicos, porque ya son barcos que cada día, sobre todo los de contenedores, duran un promedio de 8 o 10 horas máximo, y eso también había bastante fatiga en la tripulación, ¿no? Y nuevamente felicidades.
Well, congratulations to you.
Yes.
Seriously, right?
That's an outstanding program. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's a very important information for us all to understand.
Thank you. I'm Hope Tandeliza from the Port Authority in Jamaica. I'd just like to add my voice to the whole matter of the challenges faced in respect of port reception facilities, and in particular the concerns raised by my colleague from Dominica. I want to say that we also faced a daunting prospect of having to put in place sophisticated reception facilities. And so what we have done is to do what we can do. And we recognize that there are persons in the private sector who are interested in some business ideas. And as such, what we have done is to permit persons with tank trailers to receive Annex 1 waste from the vessels and take them into the industries that utilize that sort of material in the operations. And it has worked very successfully under the guidelines that we have established. And these are the movement of the waste is monitored from the ship all the way to the end user and back. And the same applies to Annex 5 waste in respect of the organization that has responsibility for waste collection. They have taken that on, obviously for a fee. And we find that some recycling takes place. For example, plastic bottles are sold to companies that are interested in recycling. So I believe that there are ways and means to get around it. It depends on the respective country, but I do believe that we are making some progress in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing what we call BMPs, best management practices, and you give all of us ideas on how we can do our jobs better. Thank you. Is it published anywhere, some of the practices that you have?
Well, we have the guidelines available that we can make available to other interested parties. And it depends, it relies to a great extent on the advanced notification form as well, so that the vessel is not delayed in any form or shape.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, too. Hope as a matter of fact, can you and I talk later? Because if you are interested, and it is in the interest of people involved, and that's a public document, we could just upload it to the committee's webpage, and that way it'll be available to everybody here and those who aren't. By the way, as a quick housekeeping thing, and I should have said this before, Mona Swoboda over there has told me that she has sent you all participants, local and domestic and international, an email just recently with the webcast address of the workshop, so that if you would like to forward it to your respective port authorities or friends, family, and interested parties, please feel free.
Is that going to be archived?
I'm sorry. Yes, it will be archived. But before I turn it over to Carlene to close the panel, I think that I just want to make a brief comment here, and that is that I cannot understate the value of you all being here, seated at the same table. This is the networking. These individuals are here, both the ones in the morning, and are here to help us, to provide assistance, comments, guidance, or just to serve as sounding boards for our ideas. And I encourage you to take advantage of that while they're here these couple of days. And if not, get their business cards and so forth, and we'll be happy to follow up on that. I am an honest believer that we really don't need to invent the wheel. it's been invented. We don't need, as we say in Spanish, to invent boiling water or black thread, because somebody already did it. What we need to do is take the best aspects of those best practices and then not copy them, because nothing works like that, but adapt them to, as we say in Spanish, tropicalizamos, right? You tropicalize it, you adapt it to your environment. And this is part of the objectives of the seminar, is to have individuals such as the ones in this panel and the ones to come to speak to you, to present ideas, and so that we can have later on a dialogue and ask questions and answers and really take advantage of the panel of the best practices, such as Hopton from Jamaica I just mentioned. I think that'd be a very good idea to put in there. Carlene, sorry.
Well, I just want to, first off, thank Jorge for the invitation, and NMEPA is honored to have participated in this afternoon's panel and to have gathered such an array of such highly qualified people. Thank you to Matt and to David and to James for sharing their experiences. But Jorge, we're happy to be part of your vision for today's and tomorrow's seminar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I confess, I'm the one that got us all late. I'm so sorry. Time for coffee.
Time for coffee, indeed. Time for coffee, a few minutes, and then we'll be back here for the last of today's presentation, which is an international panel made up from representatives from Argentina, Mexico, and Norway, in a sense. Right, Robin? So let's get a cup of coffee and meet back here in 15, 20 minutes. Thank you.